Okay, good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming to get better informed about this project. I'm often fond of looking for parallels in song to what's going on, and I thought this song from Bob Ruzicka from 1972, which is actually about the Mackenzie River up north, but I thought one stanza was particularly relevant to our own situation here, and I particularly like the last line there. She'll help the strong to stay alive. They say she'll kill the fools, and I guess I'm hoping that we're not fools in the Nashwaak watershed and accepting this mine and the waste dump that it's likely to put in the headwaters of the Nashwaak watershed. So I'm assuming that most people have a rough idea where this mine is. The Nashwaak comes into St. John just across the river here and runs up to Stanley, and if you follow it up to what's called the Nashwaak Narrows and beyond, there's a protected natural area, a large protected natural area up there. Just beyond that is the proposed mine. So this large project, which will lead to an industrial-sized waste dump up there, 750 hectares in size. And we need more information. The public needs more information to make an informed decision about whether to accept this project or not. To get an idea of the scale of the tailings impoundment and the pit that they're going to build up there, I've tried to superimpose this image on the city of Fredericton, and you can see how those dams and that tailing impoundment dwarf the Westmoreland Bridge, which runs right here, and here's the old bridge piers. So it's a huge waste dump that they're proposing up there. The excavation for the pit is large in itself. So putting that much waste on the headwaters of the Nashwaak is a real threat to the Nashwaak, especially since it's an economically risky proposition, and will probably have big problems. Anyway, we'll go on. Whoops. So, who says there's a problem? Well, I say there's a problem, but I'm not the only one. The expert review panel of the provincial EIA in 2015 held a public meeting in Stanley and had presentations on the EIA of the mine, and they had submissions from people for and against, and it was quite a animated meeting on both sides. But based on what they heard and what they read, that review panel claimed that based on the history of tungsten mining and metal prices, the greatest environmental risk of this to the province is that this mine will close periodically, or like the Mount Pleasant mine in southern New Brunswick, which was also a tungsten mine. It'll close prematurely and remain closed for decades, with the company possibly in liquidation and not sufficient funds set aside to treat the water coming through the footprint of that mine for decades, if not centuries. And because insufficient funds have been set aside, it'll be left for the taxpayers to either just pollute the watershed or to pay for the treatment on its own. So a big question in this mine is how much money is going to be set aside right up front if to, one, reclaim the land after 27 years of operation, or to treat water coming through the footprint of that mine. They've been very secretive about how much bonding will be needed. Both the government and the proponent have been very secretive. Given the poor ore grade up there, proper bonding will make the mine economically unfeasible. Now, we had a month ago, currently what's going on is the proponent is requesting an amendment to the metal mining's effluent regulation, which would allow them to dump tailings on Bird Brook, a tributary of Nappadogan Brook, and to in the pit itself, there are a couple other brooks that they may or may not need permit to get excluded from the metal mining's effluent regulation. So because economics are a big part of how fish habitat will be affected by this mine, we've been trying to get the government to release the financial security plan for the mine. That financial security plan was due 6 months after the EIA was approved. That was in 2016. We have yet to see that financial security plan. A month ago, as part of this ME, Metal Mining's Effluent Regulation Amendment, we requested release of the financial security plan so we could estimate, the probable residual effect of this mine. 7 community organizations from the Nashwaak watershed and beyond, including the Watershed Association, Atlantic Salmon Federation, New Brunswick Salmon Council, Stanley Agricultural Society, Taymouth Community Action Committee, Durham Recreation Council, and the Council of Canadians Fredericton Chapter, right from Stanley on down the watershed to Fredericton, requested release of that financial security plan so we could properly comment in the 40-day comment period on this proposal to have these streams excluded from the regulation. The province has ignored that request now, and hopefully Environment and Climate Change Canada will be not pleased by this, not even DFO and Environment Climate Change Canada have that financial security plan. So we requested that they stop the process until that plan was made available, but those federal regulators refused to stop the process. So improving this mine over the years, successive governments, this one and previous ones, have repeatedly violated the water classification regulation of the Clean Water Act, and this was documented by the Ombudsman in his report in 2014. Under the classification regulation, the streams of the Nashwaak should have been classified as Class A up in the region of the mine. If that classification were finalized as it's supposed to be, then the mining company would have had to come to the people of the Nashwaak watershed and requested their approval for a lowering of the quality to permit mining effluent to be put into the streams. Because they have not enforced that regulation, the proponent has been free to move forward with the EIA and propose dumping water into the Nashwaak streams. The government is fearful of people having that power. For people to be empowered to say yes or no based on what they hear from the proponent is very intimidating to the government and a loss of their authority. The government has also violated its Clean Environment Act by not enforcing the conditions of approval imposed on the mine when the EIA was passed in 2016, and this goes back to the financial security plan. That financial security plan was supposed to be filed within 6 months. Every time the date came up, the province gave them an extension. Now, it's questionable whether they did this under the law, because technically there should have been a ministerial decree or something allowing that exemption, but there's been nothing. It's just been a bureaucratic, you got some more time. Also, successive governments have abused the rights of First Nations, as we'll hear, as we all know. So my point would be that when the government cannot and will not fulfill its responsibility at the paper stage of this mining proposal, then how can we possibly expect them to regulate properly when the mine's in operation and lives and health and lives depend upon it? I think we'll hear from Joan tonight about the precarious nature of economically marginal mines and their increased vulnerability to catastrophic failure, as occurred at Mount Polley in British Columbia in 2014. And similarly, like what is happening with increased regularity in Canada and the world. The Mount Polley Dam, which the disaster that occurred there is pictured in that image, was a centerline design. It was built on glacial till. it was poorly maintained, and it was poorly regulated. All of the above, I'm told I should not say all of the above will apply to Sisson, but I should say that likely to similarly apply at Sisson. The EIA conditions of approval also required a modeling of a catastrophic failure of the Sisson mine. There was no time limit imposed on that, and I guess we've been questioning, why have we not seen the model? What are they afraid of showing us? I think all residents of the watershed, especially in Stanley and Nashwaak Bridge and Paymouth and Durham, have a right to know what is the probable likely outcome of a disaster, the probability of which is greatly increased by the shaky economics of this what I would call an investor shell game, and we'll hear more about that tonight. I think in essence, and I borrowed a little phrase that I heard from a grade 10 student in Stanley High School about a throwaway community, and I would borrow that and say the proponent and the government are treating our community and our watershed as a throwaway watershed. Whoops. So after hearing Dr. Kuyek tonight, I'm given what you've heard previously from the proponent and from the government over the last 10 years. I guess I would suggest that you ask yourself, are you willing to accept degradation of a large section of the pristine Nashwaak watershed from its current state as one of the highest quality watersheds in the province and the country to a degraded state containing a massive industrial waste site? Oh, brother, touchy. I would encourage anybody here who hasn't done so already to join the CCNB campaign soliciting letters to the MMER process, the Metal Mining's Effluent Regulation request for exemption by the proponent, and visit that site and either write your own letter or use their farm letter to submit comments by May the 3rd to Environment and Climate Change Canada. And one last thought. The province has been warned that they're on a downward trend and that their credit rating is likely to be downgraded in the next round if they don't come up with a better economic forecast. This mine is not the answer, and this government's chasing yet another dead-end, failing economic, what they call savior. And I would just point to the Energy East pipeline, shale gas, and now this mine. And I think until we shake this habit of wishful thinking, our education system, our health system, and our other social programs are going to be at great risk, and future generations are going to be shackled with the economic and environmental fallout from these ill-advised projects like this. So, again, that river can help us stay strong and alive, and I think she'll kill the fools that if they're not vigilant. Okay, thank you.
I'm honored to be here. I'm really honored to be on Wuest unceded territory and to have all of you in this room. And I want to start just by saying that you're faced with a really awful set of choices again. And I'm sure in your lives you've seen many of them. And I've seen an awful lot of people who are suddenly confronted with mines they don't want, having to transform their lives to suddenly become mining activists. And as I stand here, I'm remembering Daniel Ashini, who was the chief negotiator for the Innu over Voisey's Bay. And Daniel at one point said, "I've learned more about mines than I ever wanted to know. I wanted to be hunting and fishing and hanging out with my family. And now my life has been taken up for 15 years in negotiations with this mining company, but I have no choice." And I think I'm standing in front of you today saying, I know some of you are already in that struggle and some of you are going to be in it, and I understand deeply. But it's not all awful. There are a lot of fun things that happen when you're involved in a struggle for something you believe in, as many of you already know. You make new friends, you get challenged with different ways of doing things, and you at least have the knowledge that you're trying to do the right thing, which is, in this day and age, quite hard, quite often. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is profits from loss, and how companies, a company particularly, does this. HDI is not much worse than an awful lot of other companies, but they're a paragon of the junior mining industry. And so in some ways it's instructive just to look at them. About 2 years ago, I got asked by the people who are fighting the Pebble mine in Alaska, which is planned at the headwaters of Bristol Bay, to help them with an economic risk, a company analysis, a corporate analysis. The people in Bristol Bay, First Nations people and fishermen and working people, Alaskans are Alaskans, right? They're a lot like northern New Brunswickers. And they have been confronted with a mine for 20 years now that is proposing to build one of the world's biggest copper gold mines, very marginal mine, in the headwaters of Bristol Bay, which happens to be the world's biggest wild sockeye salmon fishery, recreational, sports, and others. And none of them wanted to be fighting a mine either. Alaska's in fact a mining state. People like mining there, right? But not in Bristol Bay. So they have had, over the years, opposition now from dyed-in-the-wool Republicans, businessmen, sports fishers, people in the legislature, and they're trying to make this mine just go away. The company behind it is a company called Northern Dynasty Minerals, and they're centered in Vancouver, British Columbia. They report on they used to report on the Vancouver Stock Exchange, and then when that ended, they report on the Toronto Stock Exchange. Most of the people in Alaska thought that Northern Dynasty Minerals, this was their only mine. It's not the case. Northern Dynasty Minerals is part of the Hunter Dickinson group of companies, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Just before I start, I want to explain a little bit. How many of you here have seen a mine? Not that many. And I know I lived in Sudbury for 30 years and I actually didn't even know what tailings were. So I'm going to take a few minutes to sort of explain what tailings are. Mines happen where a mineral like gold, copper, or tungsten gets consolidated. And that happens through heat and water and the movement of tectonic plates or volcanic activity. So although these minerals exist all over in the world, they get concentrated in particular places because of the dance of the Earth's crust, right? To get at that place where the minerals are concentrated that you want, the place where they're concentrated is called the ore body. And it's surrounded by rock that doesn't have the minerals in that kind of context. And when you're going to build a mine, you have to get rid of the soil and the trees and stuff on top. That's called overburden. So from an Indigenous person's point of view, the skin of Mother Earth becomes overburden. You remove that and you pile it somewhere. Then you have to get rid of the rock that's surrounding the ore body. Now sometimes that's like a matter of 4 times what's in the ore body. So they'll say it's a ratio of 4 to 1 waste. Sometimes it's just 1 to 1, but it's a lot of rock. So they have to bust that up to get at the ore body. Now, if the ore body is really concentrated and has come up in particular ways, you can use an underground mine. But these days, most of those really tight little deposits have already been taken. So most mines these days are made up of very scattered, tiny little bits of whatever mineral you want within the ore body. And the grade is about the concentration of the element you want in the ore body. So in this case, you're talking about tungsten at a grade of 0.001 0.067% of the ore body. It's like the teeniest amount you can imagine. It's smaller than my fingernail in a ton of rock. So you can imagine what they have to do to get at it. So first off, they remove the waste rock and they pile it somewhere. And then they take out the ore body and they smash it to smithereens. They smash it to face powder consistency. And then some of it can be removed by gravity, but most of it is bound to another chemical in the rock. So then they have to add reagents. They have to add other chemicals to get rid of the unwanted parts of the rock. If it happens to be gold, for example, in rock called arsenic pyrites, they also have to heat it. So they'll add cyanide to leach out gold, and then they often have to heat it or run electrical currents through it. In this case, to get at the tungsten, they have to add some chemicals to get at the tungsten, and then they have to put it in the APT plant. So they can't get at the tungsten without a plant to recover it, which has its own toxic chemicals added and electric currents and so on. So by the time you're getting to that little bit, that 0.067 part of the tungsten that you want, you have created an inordinate amount of smashed up rock soaked with water and chemicals. That becomes the tailings. And that stuff has to then be stored, because if it's exposed to air and water, in this case it contains sulfuric acid. It contains sulfur, and it will create sulfuric acid, and it will also cause other problems. And the sulfuric acid in that smashed up rock will leach through and take the other chemicals in the rock with it, so that you end up with acid mine drainage that can poison aquifers and rivers. It can blow away as acidic dust, and it will have other chemicals in it, arsenic, cadmium, mercury, whatever is in the rock that was sort of bound by the rock before. Before you disturbed the rock, it held it in place. Once you start busting it all up like that, it's available to the environment. And so those tailings impoundments that we're talking about have to be maintained forever. They are not going to stop leaching, probably forever. And we're a culture that can't even keep the pyramids from deteriorating. So what you're facing in this project is a hazardous waste dump in the headwaters of the Nashwaak River. That's really what it is. And so were the people in the Pebble Mine. They're looking at, and there they use cyanide to remove the gold. So you're looking at these low-grade mines have really big problems compared to really intense underground mines, partly because they just have so much waste, and it's a really big issue. There are parts of northern Ontario that are just made up of tailings impoundments now. In the whole Abitibi gold belt, it's really grim. And so for us here, even if you weren't facing a mine, it becomes an issue for the rest of the world. So I got asked to help these people, and in the process discovered, of course, that behind this project was a company called Hunter Dickinson Incorporated. Robert Dickinson's the first guy there. Bob Hunter died a couple of years back, and it's been replaced since by these other fellows. Hunter Dickinson is a company that is set up to specialize in finding marginal low-grade mines and bring them to a point where they can produce. And in the mining industry, there's a whole process that happens to get there. You have to explore and make sure you got lots, you really do have an ore deposit. So you take grab samples, you trench, you power wash, you use drills to drill holes every few hundred meters to see what's down below. You do modeling. And that's exploration. And then you have to get permits, and then you have to get what they call the social license. You got to make sure the people are going to let you get at the land. That has become one of the biggest issues for mining companies because people have begun to understand what mining companies do. And these great big marginal mines create so much havoc that people really resist them. So this company has become a specialist in getting rid of the opposition. And in the Pebble mine, which has been, again, they've been fighting for 20 years to do this, they've done things like hire a lawyer for $15 million from Washington to do nothing but file lawsuits against the Environmental Protection Agency to force the regulators to be willing to give in to the mine. His payment was contingent on winning the EPA go-ahead for the permitting, which just happened after Scott Pruitt became the head of the EPA in the United States. He's now, Tom Collier, is now the president of the Pebble Mine Partnership, which is their subsidiary. What HDI does is it sets up these companies that sell shares. In Northern Dynasty's case, they've sold 330 million shares to people so that they get the money to continue to do what they're doing. So HDI does the initial public offering documents. They're experts at that. They then hire HDI and its subsidiaries to do all the exploration, to do all the work. They pay the salaries of the key management personnel and the directors of the mine. And then those people make the decisions. And because they're public companies, they're required to report through the Securities Exchange Commission on a regular basis about what they're doing. So you can find out a fair amount about the money that's transferred to HDI to do this work. But what you don't know is what's happening once it's transferred to HDI, because there are a whole lot of subsidiaries, usually including some in tax havens, and you don't know who's paying who what. Investors don't know that. We don't know that. But they know it. What we do know is that Hunter Dickinson is basically controlled by 3 of these men now and their families. Robert Dickinson, the second man from left with a nice smile there, Ron Thiessen, and Russell Hallbauer, who's the man with the beard on the bottom. And we do know that they have had many, many companies that have done this. The list that has been handed out to you shows the companies that they brag about on the Northern Dynasty website about how much shareholder value they have managed to create with the companies that they operate. All these companies operate basically in the same way. And if you look at the current list, there's an awful lot of them, and they're involved in almost every one of them. So the strategies of, are you with me so far? This is a lot of stuff. And if you're having trouble understanding something, there's no stupid questions. And if you've got a question, probably everybody else in the room does, so feel free. So what HDI tries to do is it identifies these low-grade marginal deposits. They identify these low-grade marginal deposits. They buy them up from some prospector or somebody who's been fiddling around or somebody who's been working on them for years. And then they go about removing the barriers to investment. And they are become, so if you look at what's happened with the Pebble mine, there's the threats to regulators. They actually hounded one regulator right out of Alaska by saying that he had been talking too much to environmental NGOs. And in the examination for discovery, they demanded all the emails and documents related to Pebble from every single one of the environmental NGOs that had been involved with the Pebble mine. So, you know, you're a marginal NGO, you've hardly got any staff, and suddenly you're having to deal with all this litigation. It's exhausting and scary and frightening. They sprinkle grants liberally amongst the towns and communities where they want to do things. They talk a lot to legislators and to politicians. They make a lot of promises. And the other thing they do is they externalize. They remove from their ledger any cost they can. So they keep their ledger as narrow as possible and externalize everything else. So one of the things you need to think about in terms of this metal mining effluent regulation is, what are they externalizing from the costs of that tailings impoundment. They'll try and get the state or the government to pay for the port, the roads, the power lines. They'll be paying for, they'll keep a limited reclamation bond because that's the most expensive one. They'll pay for training. They'll pay to send people places, all sorts of stuff like that. They look for lots of opportunities for their own company to benefit from whatever that mine project is, which would make sense, right? I think any business does that. But they also have all these subsidiaries and shell companies and tax havens, which makes it really hard to track them. And then they pay themselves and their senior management really well. That makes sense. It buys loyalty, people stay there, they want to keep doing it. So although the salaries you'd see if you look at their filings are about, for the Northcliff, for example, $300,000 a year for the CEO. You got to remember that that CEO, Robert Dickinson, is in fact, he's the chair, I think, actually. He's going to be the chair of 2 or 3 other boards, as well as being in Hunter Dickinson. So the rewards, and plus they have shares and options and warrants. Now you can't do much with the options and your warrants unless the price of the company goes way up. So sometimes they're kind of useless to the people who have them. But they have been very good at knowing exactly when to dump their shares and when to buy new ones. So there's a whole, they're not poor. And they're, in fact, in British Columbia, major philanthropists because they can choose where to put the money they've got. So the other thing they don't do much of is pay taxes because they're a junior mining company and they don't have profits. They have losses all the time, so they don't have to pay tax. So on the list you've got, there's a list of the Hunter Dickinson affiliates historically and in their current projects. And I'm not going to spend an awful lot of time on their historic projects, although some of them have, you can see the investor report we wrote, which has condensed case studies on the MiningWatch website. If you go there and put in Pebble Mine, you'll find all the information. MiningWatchCanada.ca and Pebble. But currently, they have one operating mine, which is Gibraltar. Whoops, sorry. The Gibraltar mine in near Williams Lake, BC. They have Florence Copper, which is in Arizona. It's an in-situ leach copper project in an aquifer where they pump sulfuric acid into the rock to try and leach out the copper. The only problem is it's right beside the drinking water aquifer. What could possibly go wrong? And then there's the Prosperity and New Prosperity mines that one followed the other. They were refused. I'll talk more about these mines in a little bit. And the Alley project, which is the niobium project. The 3 that aren't Florence Copper are all in British Columbia. Amark Resources is an exploration project in British Columbia. There's you folks, Northcliff Resources. Northern Dynasty, which is the company in Alaska. Rathdowney is in Poland. They've got a little mine in Poland that, even if it operates, won't do much. And Heatherdale is exploration in Alaska. It's small. And it's not Mountain, it's Mountain. I'm a bad typist. Quartz Mountain is, in fact, a shell company. It doesn't seem to do anything except file. So a number of them are directors of Quartz Mountain, so one doesn't really know what it is they're using it for. So when I did this report, you can't really find out much about a private company, right? They're really, really hard to research. And we even had a private investigator for a bit. We couldn't find out much. So what I did instead was look at 15 of these public companies that they had talked about and 19 projects altogether. And when I'd done the research using their public filings, this is anything I'm telling you is public documents. It's either been in a reputable newspaper or journal, or it's been in their public filings. In fact, most of it is contained in that little risk statement. It's the beginning of any corporate presentation or something. There's all these risks they tell you that you're facing by investing in this company. It's worth going to one of their sites and taking a look at a corporate presentation. It's dense, tiny little print. I don't think anybody really reads it. They're mostly kind of boilerplate. But you read it, you think, why would anybody in their right mind invest in this company? But people do. So, of the 19 projects I looked at, 4 of them were in bankruptcy. And they had been since the price of gold, in most cases, or diamonds dropped. Another 4 had been sold to larger companies, and within a couple of years, the company had either written it off or had had a major loss. In one case, they had, one of the early projects, they'd sold a company in BC to Golden Bear to Homestake, and they said that the cost of the capital development was going to be $40 million, which in those days wasn't considered to be very much. And within a year of taking it over, Homestake discovered it was going to cost $80 million because a number of things had been seriously underestimated. And when they went to develop it, they found that it was on a floodplain. There was all sorts of problems. Homestake, you'd think, would have done their due diligence, but they obviously didn't. It's now on care and maintenance with a company called Goldcorp, who bought them out, and they have to pay every year to maintain it to keep it from polluting the watershed. Every single one of them was fought ferociously by communities where they wanted to put the mine. Every one of them. All of them had underfunded reclamation bonds. Every single one of them. Some of them in South Africa, it was pathetic. There was one in Tibet I can't find out anything about, but the rest of them were really grim. And almost all of them required at least some government subsidy to go ahead. And in one case, the government subsidy was bigger than the capital investment by the company itself. So if you start thinking about that, that's a pattern. And what you're facing is that pattern. So the other thing that we found out, we had a postdoc business student take a look at the company filings for Pebble and a couple of other companies. And one of the things he discovered is that the ratio between the company earnings and their deficit was way more skewed than any other mining company in Canada. So the yellow line on top is the deficit to earnings ratio for Canadian mining companies in general. And of course it's going to be higher because a lot of them are producing mines. The red line is junior mining companies, companies that are prospecting and bringing a mine to production but don't have any production yet. And the black line is the Hunter Dickinson companies. Oh. So their deficit relating to well, they don't have earnings, they're a junior company. They have a little earnings from Gibraltar. But aside from that, all they're doing is losing money. So you kind of wonder, I mean, what a strange business model, eh? What a strange business model.
They pay themselves.
They pay themselves well. So this is a picture of the Gibraltar mine. It's huge. It's got a number of pits, open pits. It produces copper and molybdenum. HDI got it for about $1 in 1999. It had been operating previously under Boliden, and it had been closed because they couldn't make it work. The BC government was desperate to get those people back to work, right? And they were also very worried about who was going to look after the tailings. So for the approximately equivalent of $1, Taseko, who was the subsidiary of HDI involved in this, got this mine. And they had it back in production by 2004. They've expanded it since. They have $7,500,000 in a cash reclamation bond with the BC government, and the rest is a line on their balance sheet. They're self-assured for reclamation. Their tailings impoundment is as big as Mount Polly's. Yeah.
What's reclamation?
That's when when you fix the mine up. So a lot of people think you fix it up when it closes and you make it better, and it looks like it did before. It'll never look like it did before. So when they talk about reclamation, usually they're talking about covering the tailings impoundment so that the tailings won't acidify or won't leak anywhere. Maybe doing something with the open pit, removing the buildings, removing the power lines, that kind of stuff. Okay? So when you talk about a reclamation bond, it's the cost of closure. It's the cost of what makes it safe to be around afterwards. So when they underfund the reclamation bond, they're exposing everybody else to risk at a huge rate. Okay, thank you for asking. That's a great question. So you can see how big it is, although often I find that slides about mines, although they're kind of photogenic, it's really hard to get a sense of the scale. Like the pits can be a kilometer or a kilometer and a half across. They can be 700 meters deep. So you just don't get a sense of the size. At Gibraltar, one of the big issues when they first reopened was that they would not discharge water into they would not discharge any of their processed water, the tailings water, into the Fraser River. The Fraser River is already pretty overburdened with this kind of stuff. 5 years after they opened, of course, they're back, well, even less than that. A few years after they opened, they're back asking if they can have a permit to discharge water into the Fraser River. They won it over the objections of the Secwepemc and Chilcotin people who said, wait a minute, you know, we're downstream. 5 years after that, they're back again asking for a permit for more discharge, and they'll be back again in the next year or so asking for another permit to discharge. So one is, yeah.
And they get granted that because they are, quote, well, economically
according to Chief Bev Sellers, who was part of this negotiation, they get granted it because nobody wants to close the mine down. And they say, well, now that it's operating, if you don't give us this permit to discharge, either the tailings impoundment is going to fill it with too much water and overtop, and we're going to have a flood and it's going to break, or we'll have to shut the mine down. And the problem is, once they're operating, nobody wants that to happen. You don't want to be stuck with looking after the tailings impoundment. You don't want to be responsible for laying people off. And so the Secwepemc and Chilcotin people have been in a really awful position arguing this. They've had death threats. Mm-hmm. Yeah?
Can I just ask, these hearings were before MMER came along? MMER is fairly recent, right?
MMER is 2011, I think.
So these hearings, at least initially, would have been prior to MMER as a process?
2009, I guess. Yeah, and the MR is a weird thing, the Metal Mining Effluent Regulation. It's part of the Fisheries Act. The Fisheries Act says you can't put deleterious substance into waters frequented by fish. What the Metal Mining Effluent Regulation is says, well, as long as you meet these regulations, you can do it. And the part that you're dealing with right now says, well, they won't be waters frequented by fish anymore. We're going to turn them into a tailings impoundment. Magic. So what they in fact do is that. So these discharge permits are covered by the Metal Mining Effluent Regulations, but they also have to get water permits from BC that allow the discharges. And they're actually, the BC ones are a little tighter than the federal ones, and they cover different kinds of metals. So it's a little complicated, but yeah, that's it. I mean, one of the problems with fighting this stuff is it's so freaking complicated that people just glaze over. It's hard to explain it and make it simple. But they fought this like crazy and they got nowhere. It's a provincial permit, not a federal one. So the current companies, just to go over it, Sandbini is the name of Fish Lake in British Columbia, where for 25 years, Hunter Dickinson had been trying, through Taseko, that's their subsidiary, had been trying to build a huge copper gold mine, sort of like the one in Alaska. But it's on Chilcotin land, and the Chilcotin are one of the few First Nations south of the Arctic Circle that have been able to get title to their land, and it was recognized by the Supreme Court. They have been fighting this mine forever. It's on Fish Lake is sacred to them. The whole territory actually is, and they have managed to beat it. They ended up in Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, and the panel agreed that it would cause so much damage to the Chilcotin people that it shouldn't go ahead, and it was going to actually wipe out grizzly bears, but the Chilcotin mattered more. And then the company came back with a slightly altered plan, which the Chilcotin said was worse. It went all the way to the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency again. These are incredibly costly processes. You need experts to review everything. It takes up all your time. First time I got an environmental assessment, it was for the Diabic mine, and I thought it would be about this big. But it arrived and it was in volumes, and it was like that. And you have to read through them all and understand them, and you're fighting with their highly paid environmental consultants and stuff. Anyway, the Chilcotin did all this, and they won at SIA again. Then the company sued SIA. They demanded judicial review, saying they'd been unfairly treated because the government had talked to the Chilcotin in between. But they've won. They've got a victory. At Florence Copper, the community organized to try and stop it. They don't want, this is the one with the in-situ leach copper project. They organized, they tried to stop it. They did everything they could. The company was just buying off every little community group. I think everybody got some little goodie, right? They had legislators who were on side, and so far they've held them to nothing but a production test facility. They're just going to test to see if it leaks. It will, I think, and then there'll be a whole other fight. But that's a big one. The Pebble mine, they've been holding it off. You know, even with Scott Pruitt, head of the EPA, they're holding it off. The company can't raise any money right now. Nobody will loan people with that kind of number of shares outstanding and stuff any money. Yep.
What surprises me in this whole story is that what you're telling people here tonight is well known. It's not secret information. Everybody can read it.
Yep.
Everybody can figure it out. And it's a very ugly story. What I don't understand is if I were the premier of a province, what would prompt me to let people like that into the province? Why don't we stop them at the border and say, go somewhere else, but don't come here? What is in it for politicians that they permit this thing? Because I know it's difficult to get rid of them once they're here, but what prevents a decent politician, and there are a few of them, just to say to these people, no, you're simply not welcome here. You're a criminal organization. We don't want you. Well, they're actually not considered criminal in almost every province in Canada. They're heroes. They win awards.
Part of it is this myth that mining brings jobs. Mining brings jobs and prosperity, and we won't think about what happens in the future. And let me tell you, I lived in Sudbury for 30 years. I sure know that story. And the rest of it, people just don't talk about, don't know about. They don't. And so part of, our work at MiningWatch, when we started MiningWatch in 1999, we thought that there would be tons of research out there that we could use to take on the industry. So we were just waiting. There wasn't. The industry had been funding universities, and they had been limiting what the kind of research was. So there was research on tailings impoundments and research on mining and the effects. But it was located in a language and a form that none of us could use in the community. And when you asked people about it, they didn't know how to relate to the people they were talking about. So we ended up, talking with academics about how you could get this research done, and that's really made a big change. There's lots of it. But it's still a secret, And newspapers like the Northern Mine are there, that it's worth it to read it just to see how they promote it. This Amark Ike project, they've drilled 50 holes, that's it. They're now saying they've got the biggest copper gold deposit in the world. Geez, Murphy. And it's on the Desequat tribal park land. So you've got it's just crazy. Do you need some water?
I have some, sorry.
Okay. Anyway, so this is, I don't understand it either, but I know it happens. And most of them have just drunk some kind of Kool-Aid that says mining will bring you jobs. And so, damn the torpedoes, we're going ahead.
They bully too. They're bullies.
They're bullies. Mm-hmm. This is a company that bullies. So this,
I don't know about here, but in the U.S., there's lobbying.
Oh.
People get reelected.
Well, if you want to see what happened with the...
That's for money.
Sure. Well, the metal mining effluent regulation, the way it is now, is the result of industry lobbying And lobbies from the rest of us saying, you got to regulate these mines better. But because the Fisheries Act was so black and white in terms of you can't do anything, the industry said, well, we need some leeway here. I mean, we're using cyanide. We've got to put some of it in the water. You know, a little bit of arsenic won't really hurt anybody. And they have, when we started at MiningWatch, they had 120 paid lobbyists and we had 2. So, I mean, that kind of stuff is what goes on. They have the lobbyists, they have people, and that's the ones we could count from the industry and the mining companies. There's also lobbyists now with all the environmental consultants and the heavy equipment operators and all the other people who make money from mining. So you're up against a very, very sophisticated lobby, and that's what they do. But these guys won. This is the Prosperity Mine.
When Harper put through the change, I don't know if it was a change to the Fishery Act, but I understand that the thousands of protected waters in Canada are now down to 100 because all you're protecting is the commercially
That's being
viable.
changed. The Fisheries Act right now, you're right, the Fisheries Act right now is under review and is actually going to be amended to be much better than it is. There's still probably problems with it. It has, but they've got amendments out, and they're going through the process right now. And so they're so complicated to follow, but if any of you can, you should, yeah.
Well, I just want to mention that this whole effort to change these acts, not just the fishery, but there's several, and we actually renamed one. They're going to say that we're implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. But we haven't been involved or engaged in any of it.
Yes.
They're arbitrarily doing this, and then they're going to say, you know, well, this Canada is implementing, and that's not what the intent of that declaration was.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah. Thanks, Selma. That's really helpful.
So that's what they're doing.
Yeah. I mean, they're doing it.
You have to.
Well, some of them are about the declaration and some of them are about other things because the environment, but it's the same thing. You got to watch it because some of it looks much better than it actually is. Yeah. And it's difficult. You had a question at the back?
A lot of this is honestly new to me. That is that you've got from all appearances the scavengers, the parasites at the very bottom of the barrel who've got nothing to gain out of it. From productive activity. They're not out there to produce anything useful for humankind.
Well,
what in the world sustains that kind of activity? Could it be, and I just asked the question because I don't really know, what's the relationship between the bottom of the barrel and the top, the Koch brothers and the Irvings?
That's a very good question. I can't answer it right now, but it's a very, very good question. Yeah. So, this is just a picture of the Florence Copper project, which shows you where they're planning to inject the sulfuric acid and where the drinking water aquifer is, which I thought might be useful for you to see. This is a picture of Dasyko Park and the Yamark Resources area. And this is the people who are fighting back all over the place. I thought you might be interested in it. The people in Florence who are, it's a prison town. And they're very polite. All you ever find, never protest. What you see is these little signs like this introduction, protect our water, protect our future. At the Pebble Mine, you see all the wonderful salmon papier-mâché things. That's people from the Chilcotin down below. And then there's the people from the Free Tibet Committee trying to stop the mine in Tibet. Up in the top, you have the South African miners who are trying to stop, who are protesting about wages and working conditions there. And in the bottom you have your grandmothers with Jacinda Mack, who last summer, who are protecting the land from Northcliff Resources. One mine I wanted to tell you about just because it's so interesting is that they had a company called Great Basin Gold. And one of the things that's interesting when you do this kind of research is you start reading when they're talking about these great deposits they got and all the wonderful things they're going to do and how super it is. And Great Basin had two mines that they bought that had previously been sort of in operation but were closed down. One was the Hollister mine in Nevada, and the other was the Burnstone mine in Witwatersrand in South Africa. And in 2013, the company went bankrupt. Both the mines stopped, and now the Burnstone mine has been sold for a song to a guy from who happened to be on their board at one point. And the Hollister mine has been sold for a song too, to some scuzzy people who aren't even operating it. So, and although the company will say they had nothing much to do with it, they were still on the board and still responsible. They got sued by Credit Suisse, who had loaned them over $400 million between those two mines, saying that they had fraudulently represented the value of the mines. And it was settled out of court, so I can't tell you whether that was true or not. And this is where the companies were in South Africa. They had a diamond company, the Burnstone mine and the Bokoni mine, and all three of them are now belly up. So just to go to Northcliff Resources, because I will talk just a bit about it. This is the corporate chart for Northcliff. The thing that's interesting to me, actually, is that it doesn't have a subsidiary in a tax haven. But it doesn't need one yet because it's not producing anything and not paying any taxes. But it's already operated through a bunch of subsidiaries, and the little round dot at the bottom is the Sisson project. And Todd Minerals, who's a New Zealand company, a bit like the Irvings, that has interests in all sorts of different things and is a private company, has about 38% of the project. They have, we'll talk a bit more about them. And then there's these transactions. This is what Northcliff has paid to HDI and Hunter Dickinson Services Incorporated in 2015 and 2016. And the biggest part, as you will see, is management and directors' fees. And in 2015, they paid a total of $2 million out to HDI, as well as, and in 2016, $784,000. But they weren't doing much there. They aren't exploring. They're not really having to work much on permits because they put the applications in 2014. So the question really is, what were they doing? Management and directors' fees and stakeholder affairs. What stakeholder affairs is getting that social license we talked about, lobbying, corporate communications was fairly high, and corporate development is also a very interesting one where you wonder what actually was going on for the money that they got. And one of the things that I wanted to make clear is that the people who are the directors and managers of this company are also directors and managers of other HDI companies at the same time. So the amount you see transferred to them here is also being transferred to them by the same people, by other companies.
The same amount, or?
It's different from each one, Alma. That's why I didn't even try and put it on a chart.
Where do they get all the money to pay for this?
It's coming out of the money that they get from shares. They sell shares, yeah. So they sell shares in the company to investors. It's called their equity, and they're paying people with that. And they also have a couple of loans from directors. So some of the HDI people loan the company money, and they at 10%. So those kind of, that's how they do it. One of the problems for Northern Dynasty in Alaska is they can't issue any more shares because they've issued so many that if they issue any more, they'll make the value of the share so low that nobody will want it. It's called dilution. And so they don't want to do that anymore. And nobody's going to loan Northern Dynasty money now. Hart?
So they're paying HDI to pay them?
Yeah, the investors basically pay HDI. And then to pay those people, yeah.
That's with the hope that in the future they'll somehow get
hope,
out of the investment.
Yeah, the people investing hope that they're going to suddenly strike it rich because the mine will start up.
Right.
And the HDI guys hope at some point they're going to sell the company to some other big company and they will make a fortune, right? Like when they sold Campo Morada in Mexico to Nurstar for I think it was $400 million, somewhere, don't quote me on the amount. They sold it to Nurstar, and a couple of years ago, Nurstar had to sell it write it off for $20 million because the violence in Mexico around where that mine has become so incredible because of the kind of drug dealing and so on that mining creates that it wasn't worth anything. So this kind, but the people from HDI who were behind the Campo Morado mine made that $400 million.
The investors too.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
Yeah. No,
so it would be better to inform all those other companies and the investors that what they think to be their profit will forever be their loss.
well, some people actually.
There'll be no way of them getting anything if HDI tries to sell that mine because it's not for sale.
The mine is for sale. The mine's for sale all the time to a bidder.
Well,
yeah.
okay.
So if they could sell it, then yeah, people might get some money from it. Most people who invest in mines are just speculating. They're buying their share low and they want to sell it high. It's a big gambling game. So even if you've got 1 million shares and you paid 1 cent for them and they go up to 2 cents, you're rich, right?
So they're buying something that will never become a reality.
That's a huge part of what goes on. Our whole economy is actually run on that kind of gambling.
Right, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, people complain about poor people going to bingo, but the whole economy is built on gambling. Okay, should I move on? We okay?
That money never goes to the local people.
No.
You know, that doesn't produce jobs, it doesn't produce money for the
It's a
community.
shell game.
Yeah, yeah.
True shell game.
You know, if New Brunswickers were wise, you know, we would do some actions to prevent these places.
Yes, you would.
It's illegal to shoot people here.
I'm not saying we murder anybody,
Yeah.
but there are other actions which are within the law,
Yeah.
which could be done, but letting them come in and destroy our environment and destroy the watershed in New Brunswick is something that we're doing for generations to come.
You're right. It's about future generations. They're going to live with this mess. So just to turn to the mine for a few minutes, that toxic waste dump, that hazardous waste dump that you've got there, is going to be, the mine itself is 5 to 10 times larger than other tungsten mines outside of China. I can't talk to you about China. I don't know about the mines in China. But it's 5 to 10 times bigger than any other tungsten mines in the world. But the ore grade, remember the amount of tungsten you want out of the rock, is 3 to 7 times lower than any other mines. So if you start thinking about it, you're producing more waste per tiny bit of ore mined than any other tungsten mine. And it makes it, I think, the largest tungsten toxic waste dump in the world. Next to China. I don't know about China. China may be fine, but China's a major producer of tungsten. Yeah, did you have a question? Okay. Yeah.
I'm sorry, where's the waste dump? Like
that big black spot,
okay.
That's the waste. And the thing around it is what they call a tailings beach. Like the fine stuff goes up against the side. They build a dam out of waste rock around it.
Okay.
And then the tailings pile up on the side, and the rest you cover with water as much as you can so that it doesn't turn into acid mine drainage.
What's the time frame on all of this? When will the mining company actually, start to pollute?
Well, it can probably, quite frankly, exploration has its own problems. So it's low grade pollution now. But as it starts building, you wouldn't believe how fast these things happen.
Well, tell me,
yeah.
give me an idea.
They're proposing a 2-year construction phase.
Yeah.
I think they use a T-minus 2 years.
Yeah.
From the first shovel in the ground to start production. And then it's 8 years from the start of production until they need to treat water in the pit, or in the tailings pond.
To release it.
Because it has to be released.
So it'll be piling up,
it'll be 8 years of accumulating precipitation that will gradually fill that. And at 8 years.
When would that start?
Well, if the permit was issued tomorrow, then 2 years from
yeah, it'll start.
But it could be MMER could tie them up for at least 6 months.
They say it is 2 years before you'll hear about the Emmer decision, and then they will start construction. Sometimes these guys start construction, yeah.
Does everybody mind if we just let the speaker finish and save our questions till the end?
Well, some of them are clarification. I think it's fairly important, and we're almost at the end. I know it's hot and stuffy in here, and I'll get over it. But the mine is a 27-year mine, and that includes the 2 years of construction, so 25 years, if it ever lasted that long. But as everybody said, it's marginal. So when the price of tungsten goes down, it'll stop operating. They can't afford to operate. So you're going to have this mess being maintained by a company that's so marginal, it can hardly make it. So they're going to be struggling along all the time, and chances are it'll close before it's finished. And if you don't get the reclamation bond, that money you need to protect yourself up front, they're presently saying you're going to pay it, and most of it will happen at the end of the mine life. You'll never see it, because as the ore body depletes, they'll have less money to give you. So increasingly, you're going to be living with more and more risk. In Quebec, they require the reclamation bond up front within 2 years of the mine starting now. So
and then the reclamation is on the populace. The taxes.
Yeah, well, unless you've got a bond that covers it all, but
which isn't
pretty difficult to get, but you can fight for it. I mean, that's what you should be when you write your letter about the Emmer, and you're all going to write a letter, of course, and go on the CCNB website after this and get your friends and family to do it. Make sure you say we want a financial assurance or a reclamation bond on that tailings impoundment that's up front and is enough to cover not only the cost of reclaiming it, but that will cover its maintenance forever. And that's a lot of money. And actually, I think if you do that, you're going to find that they can't go ahead because they don't have enough money to do it. That's what a tailings dam looks like. I thought some of you might want to see that. This is the Highland Valley mine in BC. So the dam starts where that little blue pond is, and it goes up, and it's about 400 meters high. And it's in a valley, and it's holding back all those tailings, the saturated tailings behind it. That's what one of the dams in Mount Polley looked like before it broke. So the Sisson mine is uneconomic. They say that the cost, they said, well, in 2013 when they did the studies, that it was going to cost $164 US. MTUs are a very complicated figure they measure this stuff in. I'm not going to even try and explain it, but it's for comparison purposes. They're $164. The current price of tungsten and molybdenum has gone up. So, because China is trying to fix the pollution from their tungsten mines, but it's a blip. It's going to go down again, and most analysts say that. But for a long time, it was running around $200. So we'll look at a chart in a minute. And the feasibility study that they did, the business case study they did, set all the prices at $350 US per MTU and 15 for molybdenum. It hasn't been there in a long, long time. And that's the price chart for tungsten from 2005 until 2018. And this big increase they're talking about is here. So you can see, and they did the feasibility study in here. So they based their cost projections on the high notes. If you did your household budget like that, you'd be in real trouble. Eh?
Well, New Brunswick is.
Yeah. I always like to say that economy comes from two words meaning to manage the household. If you manage the household this way, you're in deep trouble. And that's the price chart for molybdenum, and it went up just this little bit here too. That's it. That's the increase. So it's a long, long way from being where it needs to be. In England, Todd Minerals has a company called Wolf Minerals that's developed the Drakelands mine, and it's one of the largest world reserves of tungsten. But its grade is 3 times higher than the mine here, and it's in trouble. It's having a really hard time. It's having to borrow more money and getting bigger credit facilities all the time. And that's the partner that they've got right now. And the other tungsten mine in Canada, aside from the little one in New Brunswick that closed quite a long time ago, was in the Northwest Territories. It's called Cantung. It's right on the Yukon border. And it went bankrupt in 2015 because the prices were low. And also because they were really bad operators, actually. The Northwest Territories asked them to increase their financial assurance from 11 million, which was much too little, to 30 million, and they couldn't afford it, and they had to go bankrupt. And in the meantime, the Northwest Territories had to buy up an exploration project right beside it called Mactung, because they were also going bankrupt. That's the tungsten mine we had, and look at the ore grades. It's way richer ore than Sisson. So what are we talking about, eh? So this is what you got to do next. So that's the end of the presentation, and I guess we'll take questions. Tracy, do you want? Yep.